I've always struggled with finding time to manage my finances. At the end of a busy week, the last thing I want to do is spend time budgeting all of my expenses or tracking down customer service teams to cancel old subscriptions I no longer use. But now I use Rocket Money, and it does all that for me. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Stop wasting money on the things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/Washington Post. That's rocketmoney.com/Washington Post.
So, Marianna, you have been covering Nancy Pelosi for a long time, and apparently this is something she said before, but I was struck on Monday when she defended her efforts to nudge President Joe Biden out of the presidential race by saying, quote, sometimes you have to take a punch for the children. What does taking a punch for children mean to you?
So Pelosi justifies everything she does by saying for the children.
It's always for the children.
It's always for the children. And she says it so much and so often. If you ask any Hill reporter, they're actually kind of triggered by it. And we don't, she's obviously around all the time, but we don't hear her saying it as often. So it really is like, oh my gosh, she just said it. And literally you open her new book and she talks about throwing punches for the children.
Throwing punches.
Yes.
Taking and throwing punches
yes.
for the children. Okay.
Yes. The reason she ran for office was for the future of the children.
Is this like her being like a martyr? Like she's spending her political capital for the children and ruffling feathers for the children?
Yeah, it's like the weirdest justification. I mean, it makes sense, right? It's like the future of the children, the future of America, but justifying everything you do for the children is a very special way of putting it.
Welcome to the Campaign Moment. I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter here at The Post and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. It's Wednesday, August 21st, and it's day 3 of the Democratic National Convention. We're here all week bringing you all the political news and analysis that you need to know about from our colleagues on the ground here in Chicago. And today I'm joined by one of them. It's Marianna Sotomayor. She's a congressional reporter here at The Post. Hey, Marianna.
Hey, how are you?
So today we're talking about former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This is somebody who looms over this convention in many unspoken ways and private ways and is kind of the subject of lots of behind-the-scenes chatter and some public commentary as well. That's pretty interesting and that we're going to get into. In the past few weeks, Pelosi has been seen as one of the major forces behind the efforts to push President Joe Biden out of the 2024 presidential race. Of course, he was then replaced by Vice President Kamala Harris. And she can pretty arguably be credited as one of the reasons that the Democratic National Convention looks the way it does right now, not just because Harris is the party's standard bearer, but because of the sudden enthusiasm that the delegates and the faithful are feeling about the race ahead. She's, of course, speaking tonight and has been here all week, giving interviews, meeting with delegations. So we're going to unpack her role in Biden's decision to end his bid for president. We're also going to talk about how she's being received by delegates here and whether she's made any enemies over the past month. So, Marianna, I wanted to talk to you because you've covered Nancy Pelosi for a long time and you've been reporting on her role in what we're seeing unfold this week. But before we get into what Pelosi is doing right now, I wanted to remind listeners about how she was involved in Biden getting out of the race. After the presidential debate in June, I kept hearing her name come up, sort of like a person that's brokering this deal behind the scenes, sending signals, things like that, ushering this change that eventually came about. Can you run through precisely what she did, or at least what we know about it?
Yeah, so in the days after the debate, there were many House Democrats who needed guidance. Many were very much in their feelings, and Pelosi was fielding hundreds of calls. She has publicly said that she never made a call, and that's true because people were calling her, people were texting her, and she was telling House Democrats, hey, if you have a colleague who wants to talk to me, just have them text me and I'll get on the phone with them. She was very much gathering a ton of information from them and was starting to sense that Democrats felt like they couldn't influence the process. And all of that led to this interview on Morning Joe, where she reopened the debate just days after Biden sent a letter to Hill Democrats saying, the debate is over.
Yeah. He said I'm in, and she's treating it as an open question still.
Correct. She was the first one to say, well, Biden still has to make a decision, even though Biden had repeatedly said, I've made a decision, I'm staying in this race.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. He's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do.
And while it really was a subtle interview, she never clearly said Biden should step aside. It was very coded, and many Democrats were watching just to hear what she would say and understood that she was reopening this debate.
So I'm fascinated by the strategic communication of all politicians. And one thing I often do is I'll really parse these words. I think I did it with Nancy Pelosi's Morning Joe interview, where I was like, well, she's not saying it, but she's saying it. Like, she's not saying he should drop out, but she's saying, yes, this conversation should continue. She's kind of subtly sending this message to her colleagues. And that turned out to be obviously a successful strategy to the extent her goal was to get Biden out, of course. But how tricky was this effort because of her relationship with Biden and the ties that they'd built up over the years? I mean, politics is a business of relationships, and she is one of the best at that. And she has a relationship with the president. So how uneasy was that because of that relationship?
I mean, I think Pelosi has said that this has shifted their relationship. She's actually said that she's cried over it. But again, no one should be necessarily surprised because she will do everything to protect the House and keep it in Democratic hands. And so Biden ended up calling congressional leaders several days after his debate. She was one of the first ones. And that ended up actually being the last time that they spoke, which I think is significant because, again, a lot of people are saying that she is the architect of all of this. And while she does deserve some credit, Democratic congressional leaders still had more conversations with Biden at the end of the day. That's, of course, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. And I should also add Chuck Schumer, right? Because he is the Senate Majority Leader, was also hearing from many Senate Democrats privately. Schumer and Jeffries at the end of the day were the ones who had pivotal meetings, sat down with President Biden separately to deliver him the news that
at the White House.
And Schumer flew to Rehoboth, Delaware to be with Biden at his beach house to tell him basically the same message, that Democrats are going to lose the Senate and that Democrats no longer had a fighting chance of potentially regaining the House.
Jim Clyburn, the former House Democratic whip, was saying similar things on TV as Pelosi.
Correct.
So it wasn't just her. We
Yes.
should make clear.
Yeah, the older guard, because it's kind of funny to see them. It's almost like, you know, you're a high school senior and you have senioritis. You're like, I'm just going to say whatever I want. I'm going to do whatever I want. Like, what are the consequences? And you totally see that from Pelosi, and Steny Hoyer was also saying the same things of like, maybe Biden should come to a decision, and Clyburn as well. They are able to go out there and be public about it.
So it sounds like you're saying she's been somewhat freed up by not being the House Speaker anymore. She's Speaker Emeritus, so she has maybe a little bit more freedom to do these kinds of things and not have to mind some of the politics that she might otherwise have minded.
Totally. And, you know, it's been different to see her in this Speaker Emerita role, even in the way that she talks to reporters. She's way more open and candid.
Interesting.
Yeah, like she just has been. It's been interesting just to talk to her because now you're like, what am I going to get from her? What is
Like
she
when you're
gonna
not
say?
speaking for an entire conference of members, you don't have to account for things as much afterwards.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a quick break there. And then when we come back, we'll talk about how Democrats at the convention are feeling about all this and what they're saying. We'll be right back.
I've always struggled with finding time to manage my finances. At the end of a busy week, the last thing I want to do is spend time budgeting all of my expenses or tracking down customer service teams to cancel old subscriptions I no longer use. But now I use Rocket Money, and it does all that for me. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Stop wasting money on the things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/Washington Post. That's rocketmoney.com/Washington Post.
While some streaming companies keep raising their prices,
the iHeartRadio app is still free.
And free never sounded so good.
Thousands of radio stations from all over the country playing your favorite music.
500,000 podcasts.
Thousands of playlists for every mood.
Over 100 commercial-free music channels.
And over 100 million songs to fill your favorite playlist.
Download the always free iHeartRadio app and start listening now.
iHeartRadio.
So one thing I've been struck by this week is the amount of kind of public acknowledgement that there is of these tensions that lie below the surface in the Democratic Party. We saw on Monday night President Joe Biden talking about how the idea that he was angry about this whole thing. He had mentioned that in his speech on the stage at the convention and assured that he wasn't. I thought it was interesting they even mentioned that. We've also seen comments from Pelosi, from former Biden advisor Anita Dunn, that suggests that this stuff is really kind of still lingering for them. There are hard feelings about this beneath the surface. Pelosi in particular gave some kind of terse comments to CNN on Monday when she was asked about this. She's basically said, people are angry, so be it. Another thing that I've noticed, and this is something that I haven't seen personally, but maybe you have, is that certain delegates are wearing a pin with Nancy Pelosi fashioned as the Godfather, and it says the Godmother, which is a very evocative image. Like, on the one hand, here is somebody who is an effective behind-the-scenes operator. On the other hand, this is a movie about people who are suddenly inconvenient for them, which would seem to be a connection to what we've seen over the last month here. What else have you seen about how this is being discussed and how many hard feelings there are here?
There are a lot of hard feelings, and a lot of it comes from Biden's orbit. I think if you just want to talk about the president himself, I covered Biden in the 2020 election and learned that he is the kind of person who absolutely lets go of grudges. So I do believe him when he said in his speech, I am not angry, right? And the reason why is because you have someone in First Lady Jill Biden who actually wrote about this in her book, about how the president has always let things go. So she is the one who holds the grudges. She is the one who always remembers. So Jill Biden delivered a speech on the first night of the convention. Just covering Jill Biden herself, I was actually struck by just how short her speech was. And it literally was short than the type of speech that she's always given throughout her political career. So I would not be surprised if, again, she is the one holding the grudges. And there has been this tension. I mean, it's been interesting to see Anita Dunn, a former senior advisor, very close to Biden, who has also made Godfather references. In an interview with Politico earlier this week, she did confirm that she told staff in her farewell address, I really like the Godfather. And, a lesson in politics is you have to know when to strike. If you have revenge, you might have to wait years. You might have to wait a long time, but you have to know when to do that. Everyone that I have started to hear from, top officials in the party, say we need to put those tensions aside until after the election. We are so united right now. We didn't think we would be a month ago. We cannot blur the image of unity. And it's worth pointing out that some of those people who think about revenge towards Pelosi, who is such a behemoth in the party. I mean, we could absolutely talk about how she's been welcomed here at the convention. Going after her sounds like the most impossible task, and Democrats will tell you that. How do you topple the king?
Yeah.
You better not miss.
If you come at the king, you best not miss.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when Democrats are very loosely right now talking about revenge against Pelosi, really the only avenue they see is going after a potential run by her daughter, Christine Pelosi.
Right. This has been talked about for a long time, that she might succeed her mother in Congress.
Yes. It's very known in San Francisco politics and also Democratic politics that Speaker Emerita Pelosi would like to see her name continue on and hold on some kind of leverage in the House. So we don't know when Pelosi would step down.
Yeah.
But she has thought about, because she's so strategic. Pelosi is so strategic that she has definitely had the thoughts of, when should I step aside to maybe make it easier for my daughter to replace me in a special election, for example. And of course, all of that would happen after this election.
Right. Some other comments that I've been struck by were Biden, as he was leaving the Democratic National Convention on a plane on Monday, was asked about this issue, about Nancy Pelosi's role in nudging him aside. And he said, basically, she didn't influence my decision. The idea that nobody influenced this decision seems pretty far-fetched to me. But I wondered, what struck you from those comments and about how Biden is handling this issue.
So Pelosi herself has since said that she did not influence his decision. She keeps saying Biden came to this decision on his own. But we all know what both of these politicians are saying.
There's a difference between forcing somebody to do something and influencing the decision that they themselves ultimately make.
Correct.
You mentioned about how Pelosi has been greeted pretty warmly here. I believe you were at the California delegation event earlier this week. What are people actually saying about this? Is it a situation where this is kind of unspoken, but they appreciate who she is? Or are they like, great job, Nancy, thanks for doing this for us?
So I've been going to the California delegation breakfasts. They're held each morning.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, California Democrats. Any first-time convention goers here?
And Pelosi made her appearance, of course, on the first day, on Monday. And the moment she walks in, the delegates stood up and just ran over to the door where she was, and she was taking selfies. And that's very much how she's been greeted everywhere. And talking to a couple of delegates about the role that she has played, they have very much mentioned, well, she's a matriarch. She knows what she's doing. We all applaud her strategic thinking, though, maybe she should have been a little bit more cautious, but we will never go after Nancy Pelosi. And that was very much the spirit. And after she gave her remarks where she justified the reasons why House Democrats should win, what they need to do to win back the majority, she went over and gaggled with a couple of reporters.
How does this moment feel for California? Stay back, Sam. We're going to move over.
It feels very thoughtful. It feels very grateful to all that it has taken to get us to this place. I'm a big believer in the grassroots.
One of the questions was actually kind of funny, and it kind of involves a little bit of context in the House. Pelosi is known for loving hot dogs. And she has said...
who doesn't, right?
Right. And she has said that every single day when they're in session, she'll go to the cloakroom and eat a hot dog, which, by the way, the cloakroom is just right off the House floor behind doors that reporters can never see. And I had no idea that they just sell hot dogs there.
Hot dogs there. There's a cart in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she was asked, Chicago, very famous for hot dogs. What do you think about them?
You've always talked about eating a hot dog for lunch. What's your take on the Chicago dog? We're in Chicago.
I had one last night. It was good. Frankly, it's the first and only meal I've had since I've gotten here. I haven't had breakfast yet.
Didn't really sound like an endorsement.
No.
For the hot dog.
I was going to say the Chicago dog is probably my favorite Chicago cuisine. I've made my feelings on deep dish pizza pretty known on this podcast here. It is interesting. I think the Democratic Party, by and large, agrees that this outcome has been good. Kamala Harris being the nominee has led to extreme amounts of money flowing into this campaign, huge amounts of enthusiasm. Democrats are gaining in the polls. I don't think anybody is going to judge her poorly because of the outcome. But in politics, the process, as you mentioned, the process of how you get there is so important too. And people have alliances and people have feelings about being slighted. There are so many egos in the room, and all of that just looms so much over this. And so I do wonder if so much of how she is going to be regarded at the end of this process is dependent upon the ultimate outcome, whether Kamala Harris does win. Because if she doesn't, what was the purpose of pushing aside this incumbent president?
So in that gaggle I was in, there was a reporter who asked her, do you have any second thoughts, any regrets? And she gave a pretty feisty answer back.
Would I do anything differently?
Yeah.
Why would you ask me that question?
Well,
you know I'm a very deliberate person, okay?
She was terse.
Yes.
So we've talked about Pelosi's relationship with President Biden. What is her relationship with Kamala Harris, though? They're both politicians from the San Francisco Bay Area, but how much deeper does it go?
Pelosi hasn't necessarily always been an endorser of Harris. She actually supported Harris's opponent when she was running for Attorney General of California. But Pelosi has justified just the path that she's seen Harris form on her own. She's obviously been a supporter since of the vice president and has very much mentioned how Harris has, especially in the last couple of weeks, been able to work herself and prove herself to Democrats across the board to earn the nomination. And Pelosi has noted how she very much respects that effort and respects the fact that women in particular are ones who very much find themselves in these unprecedented moments at times and are able to make it work. And she actually, during the Monday morning delegation breakfast, said, this comment may be a little bit self-serving, but...
By the way, people can't see this, but Marianna does a pretty good Nancy Pelosi gesture impression.
Yeah, I've actually heard this from a number of people now, and I'm surprised that this is what happens when you cover people for too long.
It must. You've absorbed it by osmosis.
Yes, it happens. But anyway, Pelosi said that she was the first woman to serve as House Speaker, and she just happens to be from California. And now it is possible that the first woman president will come from California. And you just see her beaming and smiling so brightly. And that's the kind of relationship she wants for Harris. She does see Harris as the future and is very proud, and has mentioned this, that Harris has been able to message, not just necessarily looking back at her accomplishments, but trying to lay out a vision that encapsulates a lot of what Democrats are thinking and want to see in the next couple of years.
So Pelosi is a renowned political operator. She's somebody who gets respect even from Republicans, kind of similar to how Democrats recognize that Mitch McConnell is a very effective Senate leader for Republicans. And you mentioned how, the outcome is going to determine a lot about how this episode is regarded. We obviously can't know what that outcome is right now, but how significant is this to her legacy as one of the longest serving House speakers that we've had, somebody who obviously has a lot of accomplishments in that job? This will be one of the final big things she does, but how does it rank next to everything else from her career?
I mean, it's huge. And just another example of, at the end of the day, if Pelosi wants something, if she wants it for the House Democratic Caucus, or as she always says, for the children, she will land the plane. Like, she will get it done. And that's the thing. I mean, regardless of the many opinions that people may have about Pelosi now and forever, they know that she is so strategic. They know that she has proven herself not just as a political mastermind, but legislative mastermind, right? She was able to land the Affordable Care Act. She was able to land a number of Biden policies, even when her majority was very, very, very razor thin and very opinionated. And now she will absolutely be seen as someone who, in this pivotal time that I don't even remember the last time the Democratic Party was so up in the air about what our future is, she was able to quell concerns, able to publicly open and relitigate this debate about what to do. And at the end of the day, be able to say, I knew from my own House Democratic colleagues that we were going to lose the House. And because of that, that is why I did what I did. And I truly have no regrets.
And now we'll see what she says about it Wednesday night here at the Democratic National Convention. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Marianna.
Thanks for having me.
Marianna Sotomayor is a congressional reporter here at The Post, and I'm Aaron Blake, a senior political reporter. If you want more original, deep analysis of campaign news, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter, also called The Campaign Moment. You can find a link in our show notes and at postreports.com. And if you don't already, make sure that you're also subscribing to the Campaign Moment podcast feed. Find us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Today's episode was produced by Ariel Plotnick and mixed by Sam Bair. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Mary Jo Murphy. And also thank you to Laura Benshoff. We'll be back in your feed on Thursday. See you later.